to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, tonight we start off with the big focus on this face-off that is now brewing and intensifying between government and the social media giant Twitter. It is a controversy that we have often debated, we have often discussed threadbare when it comes to the regulation of these social media giants, when it comes to accountability and transparency of these social media giants, when it comes to our country having its own set of laws for social media, for digital media, and of course for data privacy. Now currently that draft bill is still pending in the parliament. It was sent to a parliamentary committee, it got multiple extensions, there has been much debate about the contentious parts and clauses of these laws. But while all of that debate goes on, we are staring at a situation where increasingly social media is becoming a tool, not just for campaigns for products and services, but also a tool for misinformation, a tool for propaganda, a tool for governments and anti-government institutions to use to spread their message, their narrative. And we have now reached a stage where after the recent set of conversations between the government and Twitter, it's become a face-off of some kinds. Now the question that I am going to ask tonight is, do we need a law that regulates and makes these companies accountable to our government, to our nation? But before we do that and we get to the conversation, let me tell you how it's built up and the recent set of actions that has really irked our government, our central government. So essentially what happened was, around the time of the farmer protest and the Republic Day violence, when that story was exploding and becoming the biggest conversation point, the government really asked Twitter to suspend, to block about 257 accounts. Now these were in reference to some very, very controversial and extreme hashtags that were being used by these accounts, which is why the government said that these accounts need to be blocked. This is at the peak of the entire controversy which is happening in the light of the Republic Day violence. Now Twitter did respond, and Twitter briefly did block these 250 odd accounts. But on the same day, within hours, this blockade was lifted and the accounts were active again, basis whatever Twitter's own internal study and process and checks and balances were, which was the first contentions face-off point. Obviously, the Indian government was not very happy with the fact that the Twitter had reversed its decision. Then, government sent a fresh list. About 1,178 or more names, the Twitter handles were part of this fresh list. The government said that these accounts are being backed by Khalistani sympathizers or even Pakistanis, that a lot of these accounts are actually being operated overseas, but are adding fuel to the fire when it comes to the farmers' protests and the entire challenge that the government is facing here back home. Everybody knows this story has become an international story now. In the light of that, these set of handles were sent off to Twitter. Twitter says they will review these accounts. They try to buy time. They said they will look into these accounts and see if it violates any of their rules and their policies. So while they respect the law, the decision is really going to be theirs. That's really miffed the government. The government then threatened legal action. Notice was actually sent to the social media giant by the Indian government, threatening legal action. To which the social media giant responded by saying they are also now concerned about the safety of their staff members, perhaps indicating that they fear action by the government and possible arrest of their senior officials. So while acknowledging government's notice and seeking a dialogue with the government, wanting a dialogue with the government, Twitter made it also very clear that they stand firm with their core values and commitment to conversation, that tweets must flow. So there seems to be some kind of balancing act, and obviously this is going to be one of the biggest challenges and dilemma for the social media giant. India is an extremely big market for them. While they are being held accountable across the world in many other countries as well, I want to focus on the debate in our country and how should we go about it. To what extent can governments really intervene and demand action on blocking, suspension of accounts? To what extent should social media giants be a little bit more transparent about what they do and how they do about it? Just having a policy in words doesn't really instill any kind of faith unless it's proven in your action and your actions are actually neutral. Currently, viewers, we are staring at a situation where all kinds of people from all kinds of ideologies and views and leanings are accusing the same social media giant of being biased. So what do we do? Is there a law that can be the solution to this problem? That is the big debate. It's not about which side is outright right or outright wrong. So let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us this evening. Charu Pragya, spokesperson for the BJP. Jiten Jain, director for DigiLab, joins us this evening. Prasanna S., lawyer with the Supreme Court. Virag Gupta, also an advocate with the Supreme Court. And Nikhil Pava, editor of Media Nama, joins me this evening. Nikhil, I'm going to start with you. We've had a series of conversations, but this is a juncture where the face-off is out in the open one more time. Yet again, we're having a conversation without a data privacy law or a bill or any kind of code in place. So let's begin by opening the conversation about to what extent should the governments be stepping in here, and how do we make these guys a little more transparent?
Well, Tanvi, I think it's kind of amusing that you expect transparency from Twitter, but not transparency from the government. Because at the end of the day, it is us, citizens of this country, that the government of India needs to be accountable to. Today, we don't know, what are these orders that have been issued, exactly what is the text, what is the cause on the basis of which they've issued these orders. Remember, the last time the orders were issued, the handles of legitimate news publications like the Caravan were also banned. And they hadn't even used the particular hashtag that you mentioned. So, if there is a question, and I do have a doubt about the legitimacy of some of the orders that the government has sent here, but until we see the orders, we don't really know. Of course, there should be transparency from Twitter also. They should disclose what the government has said to them, what they have responded with. But they can't, because under Section 69A of the IT Act, the rules to that, they're not allowed under law to disclose the orders that they have received. So at the core of this problem, and why we are having this debate, is because none of us here have enough information to understand exactly what is going on. And we can accuse one side or the other but really without transparency, how do we even know? Also, the government has different standards of transparency, because remember, it was Section 69A under which they issued the ban on the Chinese apps back in August last year, and then again in September. In that case, the government issued a press release, indicated which are the apps that are banned, why they've been banned, so that it was open to public scrutiny. So if they can have transparency there, why don't they have transparency now? And, I do feel that this idea of blocking an entire account is completely disproportionate, because when you're censoring an account, you're also censoring legitimate speech from there. Yes, there might be instances where there's illegal speech from a particular account. Censor that particular tweet or that particular, the text of what they have said if it's illegal. But to ban an entire account means that you're censoring their entire speech, which is wrong. Same thing with a hashtag. The same hashtag can be used by someone to protest the hashtag, to push back against the kind of perhaps alleged misinformation that has been shared using the hashtag. So there is counter speech and legitimate speech, which is also censored when you censor a hashtag. So I think someone needs to apply their mind in the government and maybe identify exactly what they want to censor and censor that. To the extent that some accounts might be doing repeat infringements, then ask for the banning of an account. But what is the step-by-step process that's being followed? Where is the proportionality in some of this that is being followed? We don't really know. Lastly, from the leaked notice that the government subsequently sent to Twitter the last time, there was an indication that this is on the basis of public order. But even when the accounts were reinstated, where is the nexus to prove that the hashtags and these accounts actually led to a public order problem? So there is no rational nexus between what is being alleged that these tweets and these handles are doing and an actual situation on the ground. So unless you can prove rational nexus, How do you issue that order? In fact, the fact that there hasn't been a public order issue probably on the basis of these particular tweets and et cetera, indicates that the order itself was not probably legitimate. So this seems to be becoming kind of like an ego battle between the government and Twitter. And in that process, I think the safety of Twitter's employees and the safety of our speech online is getting threatened. And I think that's a serious problem. We need to
Right.
address Section 69 of the IT Act and make sure that there's transparency and accountability for both the platform and the government built into it, so that at least there's scrutiny. And if there is going to be substantive blocking, like accounts getting blocked at this scale, thousands of accounts, then there needs to be an independent judicial review instead of a government committee ruling on a government order. Because how do we know that even they're going to hold their own colleagues to account over here? I really don't trust this kind of a system the way it's operating.
Okay, fair enough. So multiple points that you've raised there, Nikhil. And I want to come to the aspect of Section 69 of the IT Act and the accountability of both the platform and the government, and how do we strike that balance and who does it then. But before that, let's talk about the first aspect. Jiten, do you want to come in on this? The proportionality of the action that has to be taken. At what point do you decide you need to block the account? Did it justify in this case? Who decides that? Should mere, blacking out of the tweet, the problematic tweet, should that not be enough rather than just suspending the accounts altogether?
I do agree with Nikhil that, sometimes transparency is a better approach. Like in the case of Chinese apps, probably a press release listing out the apps, made people much more aware. And I think that is a better process. And I'm sure, I would advise government at some point of time, they should come out with a public statement that why these accounts have been blocked and what kind of content they've been sharing. I think that will inspire more confidence, both in Twitter, both among the civil society and within the government themselves. Now, however, when you come to the proportionality argument, you see, I think you can't. First of all, the word Government of India has not requested Twitter or complained Twitter. They have issued directions under 69A. It is an order, and that order has to be complied with. There is absolutely no scope for an intermediary to interpret that order or interpret definition of public order in India. Remember, Twitter claims to be a intermediary here. Now they cannot, assume this criminal liability of sitting over content, sitting as an editor or a judge or a jury and deciding how to interpret Indian Constitution. I think that is, our law does not give them that power. That power rests with the government and with the judicial forums of India, including the courts, which Twitter can approach. So I think Twitter, is challenging the rule of law in India, saying that our business policies are superior to Indian law, and government of India's or orders or Indian law is subservient to our policies. That should not be the case. It is a larger question of regulating the big tech. Now, on the question of proportionality, I think, look, it is like this. If I have not seen the content, if there is an account where only one or two instances have been there of minor hate speech or minor violation of safe tweeting, all, I think I agree with Nikhil. Probably those individual tweets should be taken down. But if the tweets are inciting hate or violence, for the timing, yes, I think account can be blocked. If the whole account is itself a bot or is being run by, in some cases we have seen from foreign intelligence agencies just to spread disinformation and propaganda, I think such accounts should be blocked. If there are accounts which are impersonating or which are fake accounts, they should be blocked. Now, even just assume that there is a guy who has never tweeted violent stuff, but now he started suddenly tweeting violent stuff for whatever nature, for whatever reasons. Should that account be blocked, or should only the tweet be withheld? I think Twitter has to answer that, because they cannot have a different standards in India and different standards in US. If withholding only a tweet was the policy, then why in the case of Donald Trump, the sitting president of US, they suspended the whole account just because of the basis of 3 tweets. You see, they withheld the tweets, right? Because they said it was inciting insurrection and all. That event had passed. Now, after 4 days, you say that we are suspending the whole account. I don't think they were, running for free speech. The day they realized that it will be Democrats now who will be controlling all Senate committees, overnight their policy change, and they wanted to send a message to Democrats that now we will fire Republicans, and they suspended the account. So if you can suspend the account of a sitting US president just because of 3 tweets, instead of withholding those 3 tweets, then in India you cannot give this argument of proportionality that for one account I will only withhold a tweet and not a whole account. Now, obviously, I agree with Nikhil. you cannot ban all the accounts. I think some accounts which you feel that are run by foreign agencies or which are fake accounts or bots or which are running continuous hatred or propaganda campaigns, you can suspend the whole account. But if there are some guys who have just tweeted some stuff here and there and which is not, which may be in the violation of Indian law or policy, in those cases I agree only the tweet should be withheld, not the whole account. So proportionality, I think, again, Twitter could have complied with the order and gone back to the government the way they are seeking the dialogue now. But you cannot say that we will not comply with Indian law, we will challenge Indian government of India's order and then we will seek dialogue. I think that is not the way. These are larger questions. You see, WhatsApp wants to have their own policy in India. They do not want to comply with Indian law. Same is with the case with Twitter. Tomorrow, Facebook will get up and say that, look, I want to suspend all the accounts of all the government officials. That cannot be. These companies, big techs cannot. Look what they're doing in Australia. They are refusing to pay the share from the very revenue they have earned from the work of the news outlets in Australia. They are going on to extend censoring news all across Australian state and non-state broadcasters in Australia. They want to run their own news website now. And now Australian Prime Minister has told them that if you do not comply with Australian law, you can leave this country. I think these companies cannot operate on an island thinking that it is only their business policies which will operate and no law of any countries is applicable on them. And look at the kind of taxes they are paying. So I think it is a larger question of regulating this big tech. It is, if there is any problem with the government of India's order.
No, so there are two aspects to it. I agree with you. What you are saying, of course, if it merits it. If it merits it and you say, okay, and Twitter does block accounts, of course it does, but as long as it goes along with the Twitter's rules and regulations. Can it be at the behest of when the government or any other entity, it can be any of us also, or the government of the country for that matter, Prasanna, can it be the government deciding what action needs to be taken or should it be left to the social media giant? On the government's part, and we've often spoken about it, if somebody is resorting to misinformation or hate speech or provoking people that could lead to violence, you have another set of laws to act against those people. Do you need to depend on social media giants to do that part? Where do you stand on this aspect?
On this aspect, I would differ slightly with what Jitendra ji said earlier. He said, so it's also the government's case that Twitter is an intermediary bound by the orders of the central government under Section 69A of the Information Technology Act. But what we are missing there is that that order has to be a lawful order. And whether that is a lawful order is certainly for Twitter to consider and take a studied opinion on whether such an order can be a lawful order. If it comes to a conclusion after significant deliberation that it is not a lawful order, it cannot be lawful for several reasons. Right? One of the reasons is that in case it has not been issued by a designated authority or it has not complied with any of the rules under 69A2. Right? These are all grounds on which it can be unlawful. There's also another ground to be unlawful is that the order seeks to achieve purposes that are not contemplated under Section 69A. Right? Section 69A refers only to sovereignty of the state, right? Security of the state, public order, and incitement to any cognizable offense, etc., etc. If Twitter forms a considered opinion that it does not relate to any of that, it can still not comply with it and it will take the consequences for it. And whenever there is coercive action from the government, it is open for Twitter to go challenge it. And I must put a disclaimer here. I don't hold a brief for Twitter here. I don't justify its action in any ways, but this is how because we've in fact had cases where Twitter has complied fairly eagerly with almost every order. It's in fact perhaps the first instance, if I am not wrong, where they have failed to comply. And this is something that we must commend. Because, we want people, businesses, particularly businesses that have a say in how our freedom of speech is exercised. We want them to take studied decisions on these matters and not leave it to just pedantic, okay, just because I have a government order, I have to comply with it. And we need to understand government orders are different from express provisions of law. Non-compliance with government orders is not the same as non-compliance with express provisions of law. And non-compliance of express provisions of law also is not the same as non-compliance with orders of court. Right? We have in this program, we've had several instances where we've had the government of India not complying with Supreme Court's orders. In the case of Aadhaar, for instance, I mean, the history of Supreme Court's orders that were not complied with. Even now, the government of India takes dates after date for example, for appointment of judges, appointment of information commissioners, appointment of Lokpal for a long time, right? So non-compliance with government orders is not the same as non-compliance with law or with court orders, and we should not be treating them equally. In fact, I would say on the 26th January 1950, government orders ceased to have the effect of a king's commandment. Right? We shouldn't treat it that way. We have to see all these people, particularly platforms that have a significant say in exercise of the freedom of fundamental right to free speech by people now, because significant amounts of political speech now happens over these media, and we want them to take studied opinions on these, and particularly they'll have to apply their independent mind as to whether these orders are lawful, whether they are necessary, they are proportionate, etc., and that can't be a mechanical exercise merely because there is a government order that they have to comply, and that's something that becomes too problematic for us as citizens if they act in such a mechanical way.
Okay, but you say that what you're saying essentially is that not conforming or following a government's decision is not the same as going against the law of the land. You have to see what the law itself entails. But according to the government itself, in that very long, strongly worded notice that has been sent, the notice actually says that the hashtag was found to be instigating people to commit cognizable offense and thus fell afoul of the Section 69A of the Information Technology Act. So since the blocking committee had upheld the ban on the uniform resource locator or the hashtag, the interim order continued to be in place. Essentially, in many other parts, the government is saying, well, this is the law and you need to follow the law. Virag, your point before I get Charu in to respond. Virag Gupta, following the law of the land, does it come from when the government tells you, do you decide it on your own? Who holds Twitter accountable then?
I fully agree with Jitin, partially agree with Nikhil, and don't agree with Prasanna. Now, whatever Prasanna is saying, it means that Twitter is bigger than the government of India. They are bound to comply with the lawful directions. They don't have any authority to take a call whether this is right or wrong. If any lawful order is there, that can only be changed either by the issuing authority or by the judiciary. But again, coming to the moot point, we are in the crossroad and we have to see the picture in the broader perspective where freedom of speech and rule of law both are in stake. And I'm sorry to say, government and Twitter both are to be blamed for this decay in rule of law. Now, let me talk about the government, how the government is responsible for this decay of rule of law. And Prasanna was talking about judicial orders. Now, 4 years back, there was 9 judges' judgment on the right to privacy, on the data protection. Government, which is bringing forms law by way of ordinance, has failed to legislate on data protection. As per the constitution, this data protection by the 9 judges judgment itself becomes a law. But despite that, neither they are enforcing that Supreme Court judgment nor they are bringing a law. Secondly, 3 years back, they came with a draft IT intermediary rules. They have given undertaking before High Court, before Supreme Court. That draft has to be notified, and I don't know with which stakeholders they are discussing, but despite many round of commitments, despite many public statements, government is not notifying those IT intermediary rules. Now, third, there is matter going on before Delhi High Court in K.N. Govindacharya matter. There is a simple demand that who are the designated officers of these companies, these intermediary companies, please disclose whether government is interacting with Indian authorities of Twitter, Facebook and Google or with the foreign authorities. Instead of replying this simple question, government has given details of their own designated officers. Even today, we don't know if there is a non-compliance of the government order against whom government is going to take this action. Now, 3-4 days back, this is a business channel, let me tell you, Commerce Secretary stated before the USTR, they said that any intermediary, such type of companies, internet companies, who are making direct or indirect money, liable to pay taxes in India. 7 years back, UPA government and after that NDA government given undertaking before Delhi High Court in KN Govindachar matter that appropriate taxes will be recovered from these companies. And I have stated in detail in my book that how these companies are earning 20 lakhs crore rupees per annum from Indian operations and government is not recovering tax. Now that's why if you compromise with your power, if you compromise with rule of law, this is not the whims and fancies. We have given a detailed list before the Delhi High Court saying that what type of objectionable contents are there in social media, whether pornography, whether violence, whether hate speech, whether fake news, and in all these cases, there are two rules of set. One is social media companies have their own policy in which all type of objectionable contents have to be removed. And second is government own rules and laws. Instead of working on those set of rules, there is political battle between the Twitter and the government. Instead of taking action as per the set norms, these type of actions that please remove these accounts, please remove these accounts, such type of things are discriminatory, such type of things should not happen. And the basic issue is that with whom government has issued direction to which authority, instead of discussing whether the confidentiality clause should be removed and whether government should come. Because let me reply to one question which was raised by the Jitin and Nikhil both, that in the case of Chinese companies, the restriction, the banning was done on the apps platforms itself. So platforms which were banned was to be informed to the common public. That's why government thought that to issue the public notice. Here they are taking action against certain accounts, which action has to be taken by the intermediary company, that is the Twitter. So that's the problem. Even today, there is a matter going on before Supreme Court in Facebook, where government is indirectly helping the Facebook by saying that they should not appear before the Delhi State Assembly. Now, we don't know with whom government is interacting of these social media companies, and if they are regularly interacting with Indian authorities, why they should not be called as the designated officers, and if they are the designated officer, why they should not be called as the
I take
permanent
the point,
establishment
Mr.
in
Gupta.
India. So there is a big challenge to rule of law. There is a big threat to government exchequer. All these issues are to be there, which are to be sincerely addressed by the government.
Okay, I completely take your point that instead of resolving this with maybe a clearer set of rules or a law, what we are looking at is a massive politicization of this entire issue and us just going from one incident to another face-off. Now, because you raised this, and this is exactly what I wanted to ask Charu Pragya as well, the need for a law, the fact that the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of privacy as a right, as a fundamental right for citizens in our country, right to privacy being one of them. After that, there was a committee that was set up, Justice V.N. Krishna committee, looked into this entire matter, made a couple of recommendations. The government drafted a law, brought it to the parliament. It's just been, stuck. And the code isn't being debated in the parliament or being looked at seriously to make it a law, Charu Pragya. We would perhaps have fewer of these conversations if we had that code a law today.
Sorry. I find it ironic that Twitter is protesting today when they have still not restored the former US President Donald Trump's Twitter account. But the fact is that either we legislate the digital world or we watch these tech giants become a law unto themselves. And See, social media gives us many good things, but it also shapes narratives. It also incites public opinions. And there are other countries in the world which do legislate the digital world. For example, in Europe, a tech giant can be slapped with a fine if extremist content is not removed within an hour. In Australia, there's an e-safety commissioner and he can issue takedown notices, and there are criminal penalties if that is not done. In South Korea, there is a law to the tune of that. And if Twitter talks about its own policy, there has to be parity between the way it's behaved in the US and between the way it's behaving right here in India. But I'll just point out something which I have noticed through my personal observation. I'm an avid Twitter user, and since the last couple of years, the controversy surrounding social media platforms, especially Twitter, has increased. The fact is, the people who take office here in India, they do not have the authority to make any decision. And I have seen this a number of times, which is very unfair for a country like India. If you're here, if Indians are using your platform to a huge extent,
Charu, we have lost the line with Charu Pragya there. We're going to try and get that line back. The feed's frozen. Let me just go across to Jitin, who had a point before that.
I'm surprised the arguments given by Prasanna, such a scholarly lawyer whom I hold in high respect, that he's saying that Twitter can take legal opinion and decide whether the order served upon them is a lawful order or not, and then act accordingly. They can decide whether it is in the right scope and with the right proportionality. Let me tell you, I am not a lawyer like Viragji and Prasanna, but I know one thing for very well, that as per Indian law, once the designated officer under 69A, if he was satisfied in the emergency situation when a recommending agency said that certain tweets may cause public order problem or are causing public order problem, they should be retained, blocked, or restricted. If he was satisfied, and the moment he was satisfied with the definition of public order, Twitter has absolutely no role or power under law or any constitutional mechanism to interpret or seek further satisfaction whether it is a lawful order or not. Whether the moment that order is passed, it becomes a lawful order, and there is no way Twitter can, seek any opinion. Only thing, as Viragji said, can set it aside is the designated officer himself or a judicial forum. Now, second, you must also understand that, and all of us should know, that law of proportionality cannot be applied under 69A because that was, as per my understanding, and I am open to being challenged over here by the legal scholars, that this law, this section of law is preemptive in nature. So suppose it is like वो दंगे से पहले anticipatory arrest कर लेते हैं ना कि वो जो शरारती तत्वों का. So even if they have not done anything, these guys are detained so that they don't create a law and order problem. Similarly, 59A, if a committee of interministerial representatives or the designated officer is satisfied that certain person can create a serious law and order or public order issue, his account can be withheld, can be blocked, even on the basis of perception or preemption that it might happen. So the law is preemptive in nature. You cannot say that this person has only made 2 tweets, that is why he should not be blocked or withheld. If the government feels that for the time being, under temporary provisions or permanently, a certain accounts needs to be blocked, they have absolutely full legal power under this law.
No, I would completely disagree, Tanvi. May I?
Okay. So because we have 2 legal experts, first to Prasanna. Nikhil, I'll come to you in just a bit. But let Prasanna also respond to this part. The law itself, what does it say, and to what extent then does the action have to be done by the social media giants? Do they have to suspend it and leave it suspended or leave it blocked? Can they decide when to unblock it? Prasanna.
Yeah, if there is non-compliance with the order under 69A subsection 1, the effect is there in 69A subsection 3. That is, it is an offense that is punishable up to 7 years. And once it is an offense, what is the process that you take? You need to, the government of India, merely because it is given an order, it doesn't mean that the person will be punished for an offense. It needs to go through a whole judicial process where there has to be magisterial application of mind if an offense is made out at all. At that point, there will also be a question whether this so-called direction that the government is relying on, whether it is lawful or not. So Twitter has an option to challenge this order as not being lawful at various stages. It doesn't have to challenge it right away. It can challenge it at a time when the government, when the state decides to frame charges, decides to actually indict Twitter for an offense under 69A3. The state also has discretion not to indict Twitter, right? You can't force the state to indict Twitter for an offense. I mean, it's a prosecutorial discretion that they have.
No.
So at
There
all
is
of
no
those
order in
stages,
law.
Twitter has an option to challenge it. If they have taken a considered view, a studied view that this cannot be under any stretch a lawful order, they are free to do that. In fact, as I want, at the cost of repetition, I'd say we want Twitter, we want Facebook, etc., to actually apply their independent mind like this and not mechanically comply with government orders, right? Because government orders, the whole idea
Okay,
of
so
freedom
Jiten
of speech
disagrees with that.
is to hold the government.
Prasanna has just given his view.
You should not miss that.
Tanvi, can I come back in?
Tanvi, I wanted to respond to a few
Please
points.
give me 1 minute only.
Yes. Okay.
What
One by
Prasanna
one.
is
Let me just
saying-
go by one because we're talking about one aspect. Jiten, 30 seconds for you, and then Nikhil Pava needs to make a point on this. Charu, I'm coming to you. Yeah.
No, what I am saying is that, but Twitter cannot then wait for infinity to comply with that order. They should comply and then go to the judicial forum or come back to the government. They cannot say that we will not comply with the government order. I mean, tomorrow any of these private companies will get up and say that we are refusing to comply with the government directives. Are we living in a banana republic? What are you saying? Tomorrow, can you say that I will not comply with the police orders or the lawful order of the government orders? Tomorrow, can you say that when I go to make a passport, I will refuse to apply with the directives of the Ministry of External Affairs? Sorry, we live in a lawful land. There is a law so that citizens, we live in a society which is regulated, which behaves as per law. Nobody is above law, not certainly the private companies. They are not the government themselves. They are not above the government.
So I think the difference there again comes, Jiten. Fair enough. These companies have to work together with the government, yes. The differentiation again comes to saying a government order is not necessarily a legal order to follow the law of the land. And there the debate can continue. Nikhil, you wanted to make a point before I get Charu back in?
I wanted to respond to something that Jiten said about proportionality. In the Shreya Singhal judgment in 2015, the Supreme Court actually believed and wrote in the order that there seemed to be sufficient safeguards in place, including a requirement of necessity, a requirement of proportionality, documentation and review when it came to Section 69A orders. And in this case, so proportionality is a consideration as per the reading of the law by the Supreme Court. Now, the problem was that because the Supreme Court understood this aspect, they did not declare this law to be unconstitutional because they felt there were sufficient checks and balances. In case the government has actually issued an order which is not in compliance with these requirements, which, for example, in the blocking of the caravan handle seems to be the case, then and Twitter has every right to push back against the order, face the consequences of not obeying the order of the government, go to court. Hopefully, this Section 69A will be written down subsequently, more protections will be put in and declared unconstitutional, hopefully just the way 66A was. We need a better law because you can't give under this complete garb of secrecy. Your government can't just willy-nilly do whatever it wants. If someone has the right to challenge the order and they need to go to court and challenge
essentially it boils
they
down
don't
to
need
the
to
same
comply.
point.
They don't need to comply in order to challenge. They can challenge without complying also.
Right.
Essentially, it still boils down to a better law that makes both the government's accountability also clearer and the social media giants' accountability also clearer. Charu Pragya, which is the question I had asked you, why aren't we focusing more and pushing that bill through? If there are changes needed, if there are concerns that have been raised, why aren't we focusing on that? That was one of the pet projects of your government.
Yeah, and I think this is high time that should be made a priority because slowly and steadily, the way social media is taking over all our lives, it's apparent for all of us to see. The point I was trying to make when I was unfortunately cut off because of a bad internet connection is this. I have been using Twitter very avidly for the past couple of years, but every time there is a hitch, every time there is a problem, and the government summons Twitter, Twitter sends its employees posted in India which are not even allowed to make a policy-based decision. So what is Twitter trying to do? Isn't this blatant disrespect for the Indian government? And this should not be allowed. No tech giant should be allowed to behave in such an arbitrary manner. You are not above the government of India. You are not above the Constitution of India. And while you're here in India, if you can set up an office in India, employ people to work in that office, you have to comply with what the government of India wants you to do. They send employees who are not allowed to make any decision. They go sit in that meeting, they sit in front of the parliamentary committee or they reply to notices and they say, we are not allowed to make a decision on this. These decisions are taken in US. And I just was mentioning how arbitrary their policy seems because they have still not restored Donald Trump's account. His previous account, his POTUS account is also being labeled as something else and it's not an active account. So how fair is that? And that is something we have to take into consideration. They do not work in parity and this cannot be taken lightly. Twitter cannot be above our constitution, and when the government summons them, when the government expects them to give a valid and proper response to something, they should be doing that. Another thing, right in the beginning of the debate, you were talking about how Twitter fears how its employees are being treated. Well, let me tell you, there is no such fear. Government of India is very responsible. We understand that the people who turn up for these meetings are not key decision makers. Decision makers are not even sitting here in India, and that offends me. That offends all Indians who are using Twitter.
So let me ask you that. How many times has the government summoned Jack Dorsey?
That has happened in the past. Yes, it has. But the thing is that when the government is discussing these issues, they send these things saying that we are not going to turn up in front of the government of India. That's happened when they can turn up at other places. Why not government of India? And it's really, really disrespectful. We're all using Twitter.
No, that I understand that, and of course the government wants to, make them accountable. But I am just trying to understand how many times has Jack Dorsey been summoned by the government? Why don't we, if we have such a problem with the company not complying, then get orders from the court and get him to our country and make him present himself. I remember a few years ago, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, as the minister, said he is going to ensure, when this entire Cambridge Analytica controversy broke out, that Mark Zuckerberg comes to India and he's made accountable. I'm still waiting for Mark Zuckerberg to come to India and be held accountable. I'm still waiting actually for the draft bill to be made into a law, and so that some of these guys can be held accountable, or for that matter, Jack Dorsey. But instead, we have a law which is a draft which is stuck with the parliamentary committee. Nobody wants to talk about it anymore. It's just been put into cold storage, and we just have these one after the other controversies emerging every time there is a huge political issue. Mr. Virag Gupta, you wanted to make a point. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
My question, instead of calling Zuckerberg or other persons, government authorities and parliamentary committees, why they are meeting unauthorized persons? These Indian companies have given the affidavit before Delhi High Court and Supreme Court. They are saying they are not representing the main company if they are not authorized, if they are not representative, if they are not representing the permanent establishment of the main company. Then why you are meeting those persons who are using all the powers but not sharing any responsibilities? Please let me complete, then you can reply. My first question is, please, I am asking three questions. My first question is, why are you meeting unauthorized persons who don't claim any accountability but use all the authorities and they exploit all the resources of country? My second question is, in the last 6 years, how many times you have imposed any penalty for data breach? My third question is, why you are comparing with the European Union, that they are treating different in US and European Union? In the last 6 years, what action has been taken to legislate so that people of India, these digital, all persons who are using the digital, these technologies, are equipped with the authority so that they can safeguard their interest? Now, coming to the Prasanna point, when he is saying that this
Okay.
this order
Allow
Twitter
me
is not
to
compelled
respond
to
before
comply.
time runs
Now my
out, because
question is,
Tanvi, this is
No,
as
no,
per
no, 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 no. So,
they
Mr.
can't,
Gupta.
Tanvi,
let me complete.
Tanvi,
Let me
Tanvi,
complete.
allow me time
They
to
can't.
quickly respond
Please,
to
Charu,
what
Mr.
Charu,
Gupta,
please complete.
allow me, Mr. Gupta, 1 minute, please. Virag Gupta, let me get Charu Pragya to respond to your 3 questions before you move to the other point. It's essential that she answers these questions. Why are you meeting? Why is the government meeting with unauthorized people? How many times have we imposed penalties on data breach? I think this is a very, very valid and important point that has been raised. What action has been taken to legislate? Well, the draft is still in cold storage, so that's that. Yeah, but Charu.
See, Tanvi, at the risk of you opposing what I'm going to say this. There is a section of people here in India who take an opposite stand to what the government says every single time, and that's very unfortunate. If you'll remember, before the 2019 elections, the IT committee had summoned Twitter, and Mahima Kaul had turned up. She is the main in charge for our country, and she had turned up. But the chairperson of the IT parliamentary committee refused to meet her because she said she doesn't have the authority to make any policy decisions. When the chairperson refused to meet her, it caused a huge uproar. A lot of people took to social media to criticize the chairperson of the parliamentary IT committee because he said she was made to wait. The chairperson summoned her but didn't meet her. The fact is the chairperson summoned someone who was able to take a decision when this person wasn't. He refused to meet her. So we have to also understand we have to unite in national interest. We cannot be taking to the internet and creating a big hue and cry every time something like this happens, which is what happened this time. I think there should not be two decisions at all. When someone is trending anti-India hashtags, how can we not take a decision against it? How can we not take a stand against it? And yet there are people who are defending it. Yet there are people who are tweeting pro that hashtag. What are we going to do when a country is determined to divide itself? The government is working in your favor. The government is trying to protect you. The government is trying to do the best. But why do you take a contrary stand to what is good for your country?
No, please. 2 points. Number one.
I am just wondering which part did you expect me to oppose, Charu?
Please.
Sorry, 1 minute. No. I just want to understand, Charu, which point were you assuming I would oppose?
Oh, because I thought you were going to say that Mahima Kaul shouldn't have been made to wait. The parliamentary committee should have met her, but what is the point of meeting someone when they can't take a decision? See, we have to make sure, as Viragji said, I disagreed with a lot of things that he's saying. I agreed with a lot of things that he said, in fact. But I want to make one thing very clear. We have to assert ourselves in the world of social media. If we do not legislate that, they will become a law unto themselves. That is the
No. So 1 minute, please. I don't want to Charu and Virag Gupta, I honestly don't want to get into a debate of what level official was summoned, what level official should we have met. I am more interested in what comes out of these meetings. What comes out? No, sir. Please let me go on to the next bigger part, which is very, very important. And Nikhil Pava, I come to you on that, and then to Prasanna about the new law. And which itself has raised a lot of concerns. The draft that has been proposed, the data privacy bill, where the government says that this is going to ensure that these companies are more answerable to us, we can hold them accountable, that the servers will be in India, so they will have to answer us, that privacy will come into place. Just for our viewers to understand, will that really solve the kind of issues we are staring at right now?
Well, Tanvi, the data privacy law already doesn't have anything to do with Section 69 of free speech issues, but it is extremely important. In fact, under the able leadership of Ms. Meenakshi Lekhi, under her chairmanship, they have held several meetings over the last year, and they have just announced that the Joint Parliamentary Committee's report is going to be tabled in Parliament in the second part of the budget session. So we're eagerly looking forward to their version of the bill. In fact, she went on record to say that 89 changes to the bill have been made, and hopefully that will lead to stronger privacy for people like us in our country, and hopefully it will hold all platforms, Indian or international, to account. The other part is that there are amendments that have been proposed to the information technology rules last year, which have still not been made public, not been implemented. And we're waiting for a Supreme Court hearing because MeitY was supposed to announce it before the next Supreme Court hearing on that issue, which got derailed because of COVID. Now, there was one point that was made about Donald Trump's account being banned. And see, when there are repeat offenders, when there's repeat incitement to violence, under those circumstances, I think the platform should ban those users. In fact, even with Indian accounts, if there was repeat incitement to violence, they should be banned. There's no denying that incitement to violence is illegal and it shouldn't be allowed. In case there are individual instances of advocacy, by the way, advocacy is not illegal. You can criticize the government of India. You can criticize a law that the government is proposing. That is legal. And in fact, in the Shreya Singhal judgment, Supreme Court has said that advocacy is fine, incitement to violence is not. So let's be very clear. The criticism of a law is not a criticism of the government. The criticism of the government is not criticism of the nation. There is a distinction here. And it's very important that in a democracy, we be free to criticize what we disagree with the government about so that a better law can be created, so that better rules and regulations can be created. All of us on this channel are agreeing on some things, disagreeing on some things, and that's an important part of democracy. It is an important part of free speech. Censorship of speech en masse, banning accounts en masse is not called for.
I fully agree.
Okay, no, I agree with you on that one, except that I also feel that even from the user's point of view, we, some people also have to be slightly more responsible. Yes, it's your right and you must, and we do question the government on its policies, try and hold the governments, whether it's the center or any of the states, accountable, and we must continue to do so. But one has to also be responsible about the phrases and the words that you're using. Words like genocide and pogrom and what not get thrown around as if
So if they're violating the law,
absolutely.
take them to court.
So
file
there
FIRs
also has
against
to
the
be a
people
balance.
who are violating the law. Completely agree. Someone who's doing something illegal should be held to account.
Okay, so then how do we resolve this problem? Like you said, Nikhil, apart from the draft which is currently being considered by the parliamentary committee, Prasanna, the issue at hand, that of section 69, how do we resolve this issue? Is there a change in legislation which is needed? To the point that Virag Gupta was also making earlier, that it's both sides that have actually made a mess out of it.
Right. So as Nikhil pointed out, the data protection bill will have little impact on the situation at hand. In fact, that is more to hold the intermediaries or the companies that collect data responsible to users and citizens rather than making them responsible to the government. And 69A, whether there needs to be a legislative change, there are certainly a wish list that I do have, right? So where can you have more safeguards? Certainly you can. I mean, one phraseology there is necessary or expedient. I mean, I would say that there are already judgments that have laid down that phrase to be necessary and expedient. So, but other than that, 69A seems to work all right thus far. And so long as, in fact, it will work better if intermediaries start behaving like Twitter did behave in this case, right? Where they take independent legal counsel, they form an independent opinion, not merely just dictated by the government on what they have to do. And the last point that I want to make, in response to what Charuji said in the earlier round, was that Twitter was disrespecting India, Facebook is disrespecting India, is that this respect won't be bestowed, it needs to be earned. Thank you.
No, but they still should be giving similar kind of priority to one government and other. Many times that Mark Zuckerberg has presented himself in front of congressional committees.
You cannot say that in the case of government and a private company, it has to be earned and not bestowed. They have to respect. They have to comply.
So that is the distinction that I made earlier. It is government is different from law. Law is different from court. We should not conflate all of them.
If you don't want to follow the law in India, if you don't want to follow Indian law, it may
Okay. I fear Prasanna's comment has triggered another war of words here. Maybe we can keep it for another day, where the battle is really between showing respect to the government is the same as showing respect to the law of the land. But I do believe that if giants like Facebook and Twitter can respond and react in a better way to some of the Western nations, including United States, where they're constantly kept in check. Laws are being relooked at. They're made to present themselves and explain themselves in front of these congressional committees. There should be that level of accountability in our country. Does that mean that the government gets a free hand on deciding every single time what accounts should be allowed and what should be blocked? Maybe not. We have to find a middle path here, which is simply a lot more transparent, to ensure that not one side, whether it's the social media giant or the government, that not one side gets all of the power in their own hands, because then it will lead to abuse of power. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.